hybrid coasters, hypercoasters, and a whole bunch of cloned coasters. I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is Coasting into Six Flags Over Mexico. Last March, I had a fantastic coaster trip to Mexico, and on it, I visited a park that had long been near the top of my to-visit list, Six Flags Mexico. The park is home to 9 roller coasters, with the 2 standouts being their Superman Hypercoaster and their RMC Hybrid Medusa Steel coaster.
So I'm here today at Six Flags Mexico.
I'd actually be visiting the park over the course of 2 days, as the first day I had spent the morning at La Feria de Chapultepec and ended up leaving early as most of the rides were closed for maintenance. Knowing that I had the best part of 2 days at the park, I ended up doing something a little bit stupid on my first day. I was coming up to riding my 800th coaster at the time, and had planned for it to be Medusa, as this was a coaster I was most hyped for. Unfortunately, due to missing several coasters at La Feria, I would need to ride most of the park's other coasters so as to make Medusa number 800, so when I arrived and saw everything in the park seemed to be running fine, I made a loop around the park as quick as I could to tick off all the rides before returning to find Medusa had closed, and it didn't open for the rest of the day. Crowd anxiety was pretty high on my second day, as the rides was still closed when I arrived, but thankfully it eventually opened and I was able to ride it and make it my 800th coaster. And what coaster it was.
Probably one of, if not the best RMC coaster in the world. It's got amazing pacing, there's not a dull moment in it at all.
Medusa was the 3rd RMC hybrid conversion to be built, and the first one to open outside of the United States, and I have to say that after riding all the others, it's one of my favourites. It gives a raw, expertly paced ride that really is all killer and no filler. In later RMCs, I found that they sometimes seem to add wonky or weird elements seemingly just to try and be different. Wibbly track for the sake of wibbly track, or innovation for innovation's sake, rather than to improve the pacing or flow of the ride. Whilst a lot of these elements do end up working, and making for great rides, some of them don't, and to me they just feel kind of awkward. Medusa doesn't have any of that though, and in comparison it's just big element after big element, packing in airtime, inversions, and a relentless pace without anything detracting from the ride.
The pacing is just phenomenal, it's just one element after another, no letdown, no respite, boom boom boom, it's just such a fantastic coaster.
The one place where Medusa did innovate, however, was pulled off absolutely flawlessly, and that's the first drop. This twisted inversion flips you upside down whilst you plummet towards the ground, right as the ride starts, letting you know you're in for one amazing ride. I can't really think of any other coaster that started like this, until RMC repeated the element on Storm Chaser and Twisted Timbers. A couple of other coasters have had some slightly similar elements, such as Nemesis with its corkscrew partway through the first drop, but the element on Medusa starts straight away as the drop begins with no lead-in, and it's much tighter. The rest of the ride's inversions are great fun too, with perfectly executed 0G rolls that are silky smooth, and the flow and transition between elements is just sublime. There's some great moments of airtime on the hills, and the way the ride twists and turns through all these elements is just so well paced, it really is one of the top coasters in the world. Almost surprisingly, I think that it's actually the shortest of all the RMC hybrid coasters, as it stands less than 100 feet tall, but that doesn't stop it from packing an incredible punch. There's not a single part of this coaster I don't like, and I'd rate it very highly, as it's unquestionably the best roller coaster in all of Mexico. I should also mention another strange quirk that the coaster has. For some reason, the entrance to the ride is through a house that is tilted up on its side, like you'd find on a kind of funhouse walkthrough. And I'm not really sure why this is, as it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with Medusa or steel coasters in general. I should also mention that the queue line is quite long and doesn't have any shortcuts, which can make it a little annoying if you just want to run round and ride again and again, so be sure to wear some comfy shoes if you do visit this park. My second favourite ride of the park has to be Superman El Último Escape, the last ever Morgan hypercoaster to be built, and the tallest, fastest and longest roller coaster in Latin America, standing nearly 220 feet tall and stretching out over a mile long. This coaster is a bit different from other Morgan hypercoasters as well, as it starts out in a rather unique way. After leaving the station, it has a terrain coaster section which goes over a couple of small hills and twists through the trees before you reach the bottom of the huge lift hill. The rest of the layout also differs from other Morgan hypercoasters, in that the first element after the drop isn't simply a big airtime hill. Instead, it's a hill that transitions smoothly into a swooping helix that dives down to ground level at great speed. This is followed by a few more high-speed diving helices that really give a fun sensation of speed and fit well with the Superman theming. It's almost as if you're flying along with Superman, as he does some low-to-the-ground passes while pulling the coaster behind him. The ending is a bit more traditional, however, as there's several satisfying back-to-back airtime hills before you hit the brakes. It's a great fun, smooth coaster that gives exciting airtime and fantastic speed sensation, and it really stands out being nearly 100 feet taller than any other coaster at the park, and no other coaster in Mexico can come close to anywhere near its imposing size. Superman and Medusa make for a great pair of unique roller coasters, but unfortunately the same can't really be said for the rest of the park's lineup, as all 7 of the other coasters are a clone of something somewhere else. Rides such as a Boomerang or Zero Tivoli can be found at many parks around the world, and the ones at Six Flags Mexico do little to separate themselves from them. Some of the coasters do try to stand out a little bit though, with the park's Joker spinning coaster being a good example of this.
So this version of the Joker ride actually has a little bit of a walk through. It's like a mini funhouse that you go through before you go on the ride itself. It's a nice little addition, and some nice theming for Six Flags Park, really.
The park is also home to a version of Batman the Ride, but despite the name, this isn't a B&M invert. Instead, rather unfortunately, it's a much inferior standard Vekoma SLC.
So, like a lot of parks, this one's got an SLC. And as the SLCs go, this is probably one of the better ones. Even though it's got the old trains, it's not as rough as a lot of them. It's still far from being a great coaster. I do quite like the colour scheme of this one though, it just really sort of stands out in the area, particularly next to Superman behind it.
The bright yellow track and purple trains really do make it stand out in the Mexican sunshine. It's not the only ride in this area though, as there's also a version of the Justice League Dark Ride, but this seemed to be having a few technical difficulties.
Now behind me you might see the Justice, I believe, for the Justice League 4D ride, except it's not really that 4D. I did it first thing in the morning, and the 3D didn't work at all, like all the screens were on, and they gave me glasses to go around, but it was just a 2D flat screen. I did it later on in the day, and they just had given up on the glasses part of it, so we were just going around without them shooting things, except that my blaster didn't work. So, not the best version of the Justice League ride, I'll have to say that.
The newest coaster at the park is Wonder Woman, an SNS 4D free spin coaster.
So behind me is Wonder Woman, which is another of these SNS Joker clones. There's also a similar one at Fiesta, Texas, which is themed to Batman. Now personally, I'm not a huge fan of these coasters. I find they don't really have much of a flow to them. Just with the weird kickers that you've got, you're going along one way and then suddenly you're just kicked head over heels. I don't think it's in a good way, personally.
Now this was filmed before my last trip to Japan, where I experienced Arashi, and my opinion on these coasters changed to finding them really quite tame in comparison. This version in Mexico only flips you 2 or 3 times, which is nothing compared to the 10 or more flips that Arashi gives you. I spent most of the day going between Superman and Medusa, as these are definitely the standout coasters here, and really make the park well worth visiting. If you do visit, I'd recommend taking an Uber taxi here though, as they're really cheap, and much more convenient than the public transport options. Public transport in Mexico City is incredibly cheap however, with a journey on the subway costing only 5 pesos, which is about 17 pence or 21 cents, and I reckon this is probably why the Uber taxis are so cheap in order to be competitive. All too soon though, my time at Six Flags Mexico had to come to an end.
So it's been a rather fun day here at Six Flags Mexico. The only slightly disappointing thing was the park's just shutting now and the sun's just gone down. I'd have absolutely loved a night ride on Medusa, I think that would be even more phenomenal. Unfortunately they shut the queue line slightly early. I had the last ride on Medusa at about 7:15, park shuts at 7, but unfortunately when I got off and went round they'd shut the queue line so I couldn't get another go. Still had a whole bunch of rides on it, it's fantastic today.
Maybe one day I'll return for that night ride, as overall I thought this was a pretty great park, even if it could use a couple more unique attractions. Still, it's easily my favourite park that I visited during my trip to Mexico. The next day, I'd make a brief return to La Feria de Chapultepec to try and mop up some of the coasters I'd missed, before catching a plane to Guadalajara in the evening. The next park I would visit would be Selva Magica, where I would be reunited with a coaster that I'd seen in the UK a long time ago, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. For now, I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.